just imagine that that you had a direct, clear, absolute, complete recognition of the fact that who you've been being in your life and who you knew yourself to be didn't exist. I mean, really have a direct experience of that, right? I was sharing with Frank earlier about this guy, Robert Fripp, right? The musician. He said that when that struck him, it was like lightning striking him. He said that when that struck him, he was terrified, because that the absence of the existence of who you thought you were leaves you, can leave you in a state of emptiness, of vacuum, of nothingness, and that's scary for people, right? So that's the experience as far as I can tell, because that was exactly the way it was for me. And as I was sharing with Frank earlier, that afterward, everything that seemed important before that didn't seem important anymore. For example, like being in control. Being in control is something that for the average human being is very important. We do a lot to be in control, don't we? Yeah, we live our lives with being in control as a major interest, to be in control, meaning to stop things from happening that we don't want to happen, to make things happen that we do want to happen, like that. So one of the things that happens when this lightning strikes is that you realize that control is an illusion, right? And you don't have any control. And not only do you realize that you don't have any control, you realize that you never did have any control, and that there was never anybody to have any control. So I think the way that kind of direct experience affects people is different from one person to the next, given a bunch of different factors, right? In my case, it was a relief. On the one hand, it was a relief because it was obvious that I didn't have to keep trying to realize who I was anymore. That prior to seeing that, it seemed as though what there was to do was to have me, the person, realize who I was. That seems to be the way it goes for most people, that, when you first become interested in this, you've been living the life as a person. You've been being that person. Your whole reality has been tied up being that person and living life as that person and doing what you thought would get your life to be a success story as that person, living in a world of other people who were doing the same thing. And it seemed as though that was reality. That was all there was, right? Of course, there was suffering going on, right? So although that seemed as if it was reality, there was this interest in somehow getting that to work. And it seemed as though getting that to work had something to do with something more than just circumstances. That maybe there was something missing, maybe there was something that wasn't understood correctly, or whatever the case may be. But when that direct experience happens, it's obviously a game changer, right? Because you're not the center of the universe anymore. You're not the center of the universe anymore, and you begin to see things differently, dramatically differently, in terms of understanding that if being in control was no longer primary, and if being the person that I had considered myself to be is no longer accurate, then there's a place from which to see all this other than that. And when you see all this from a position other than that, when you see all this from the view of awareness, where there is no interest in control, where there is no attempt to try and survive anything, where there is no threat happening, then you're free to look at the personality realistically. And you can begin to see what's really going on. You can begin to see your personality behaving inappropriately. And you can begin to see that, and you begin to recognize that you're no longer identified with that program. So when that program plays now, you're seeing the program playing. You're not being that. You're not being that person who is trying to survive. You're not being that person who is being right. You're not being that person who believes their emotions are the truth. You know, you're not being that person who believes that their thinking is accurate all the time. So from that point of view, when things come up from this new, view, when things come up in terms of having, for example, when a situation arises that stimulates strong emotion, strong anger, strong rage, strong survival behavior, right? That now, instead of looking from the view of the person that is behaving that way and feeling that fear, and that you can see that, you can from awareness, you can see that this is the entity operating, and this is the entity that is having this reaction and these strong emotions, and this entity wants to be in charge and wants to have you behave a certain way and wants to have you say certain things, right? But now you're seeing it, so it's not. So because you're seeing it, you see that that's not workable. That's not necessary because now you're free from having to control anything. Now you're free from feeling afraid and threatened. So it's obvious that you don't need to do that. Yeah, and so what happens is you start being different. You just start being different. You start acting out what the thoughts tell you to act out. You stop acting out what the emotions tell you to act out. And life becomes more available in the sense that you don't waste energy anymore behaving in ways that don't produce anything that you really want or need. You stop being angry when anger doesn't serve any purpose, The anger can come up, you can see the anger, you can even hear the thoughts that justify the anger, right? And you can feel the compelling energy to act it out, right? But you're free from having to do it now.
So you're more of an observer there of what's going on.
Yeah. You're witnessing. You kind of have this seeing that they call people that wake up seers. You kind of have this seeing that starts to happen where you're seeing things that you didn't see before. So as far as I can tell, in every case that I'm aware of, that is always what the turning point amounts to. That there's a direct realization that who you thought you were never existed, that it's not real, it's not true. And that's such a dramatic, especially because this is not a conceptual understanding that I'm talking about, right? That's such a dramatic turn of events. It's like a rebirth, right? It's like a dramatic turn of events where you see, and this happens suddenly. This has happened suddenly. I remember very distinctly that I had an interaction with my wife. And one of the places you can see this most clearly is in the closest relationships that you have, right? Because they're the relationships that you're most vulnerable, which means they're the people you get the most upset with, they're the people you get the most pissed off with, right? So I remember a distinct interaction with my wife where I don't even remember the content. I mean, because when you see things as they are, you realize the content is usually such crazy shit that's not worth fighting about. And I remember a distinct interaction with her where she said something to me and I could see the whole thing happen. She said something to me and it triggered some very deep thing in me of being insulted, of being disrespected, of being neglected, of being not loved. And all of a sudden there was this rush of energy, to fight and to tell her off and to make her stop, and to get away from her, right? But I was seeing this. I wasn't identified with it. I was seeing it happen, right? And it was so strong that I couldn't stop my mouth. Do you understand? Do you ever have that experience of anger where it's so strong you can't stop your mouth? Your mouth has to say it, right? So I said what my mouth had to say. You know, it wasn't pleasant, right? And you know, if you've been in arguments or fights with people you're close to, you know, they're the people that you get nastiest with, right? You pull out all the stops, right? You go right for the killer shot, right? So that happened, right? And she was upset and I was upset, and it was like this whole thing. And I could also see at that time that this wasn't the first time this happened, right? That this was something that had happened before with other women, right? And I had been divorced. I divorced women for this. I divorced women for this, right? But then, you know, so I'm seeing all this, even though I couldn't really stop it from running, right? But then after it kind of died down, and you know, and I was like coming back, because you do go like temporary insanity when you're in rage, right? So I came back, and then I went up to her. She'll never forget this. In the middle of all this, right? Can you imagine? I went up to her and I said, by the way, everything that just happened, please forget all that. Please forget all that. I don't mean any of that. It was all just craziness, you know, and so whatever I said isn't true, and, you know, I'm sorry, and, you know, let's just continue from here. And she just looked at me like I totally lost it, right? Because I was breaking script. I was outside of script. She didn't know what to do next, right? She would have known what to do next if I continued to be crazy, because we've done this before, right? But she didn't know what to do next, right? So it was like that, right? It was like that, and it became like that with other things. And it also, and I didn't really see this until recently, it also opened up a way of being for me in which my natural desire, my natural interest in being of service and making a difference was real. That was real now. It wasn't about making money. It wasn't about looking good. It was about if I have something that I can contribute, that can make a difference, especially if that difference can be significant, then that's what I want to do, right? And that was a little confusing for me, because what that meant was that I was going to do things that would get me in trouble, right? I mean, I was working in the prison at the time, right? And so here I am in a position where, you know, these men who are imprisoned are being abused, right? And the justice system didn't exist, right? And so this was really a place in humanity where horrific things were going on, the way people were treating each other and so forth. And I worked in the middle of that, right? So this burning desire now started to be something in which was pushing me to see how much of a difference could I make, and what kind of a difference could I make. So I went from being a psychologist in the prison, intentionally pushing my way to be in charge. You know, because when I first started doing this kind of work in the prison, I was doing it in a maximum security prison. And after I did it, about 3 cycles of men that I was working with, where we were doing a week of intensive work like this, locked in the death house together, right? Because they didn't have enough guard coverage. So the only way they allowed me to do this is they said you could work with the inmates in this compound that was separate from the rest of the prison called the death house, where they would take inmates that were sentenced to death for the last month of their time before they would put them in the electric chair, which was in the death house. So I was doing this transformational work with inmates in the death house, right? And there was an electric chair in the back room, right? And we were locked in for 5 days in a row together without any guards, right? And I had guys in there that were mafia bosses, black militant leaders, you know, I mean, really. But I felt that I didn't have a choice about it, that this was what I had to do. And I did that for about 3 cycles. And then I got a word from the warden telling me to stop doing it, or I would be fired. Yeah. And so the only reason I was given for that is that the warden said the inmates that were going through my program were behaving too quietly.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, behaving too quietly, and they were suspicious that that meant that they were preparing to do something to disturb the prison, so they told me to stop the program. And when I was told that, right, my next move was, okay, I have to become the administrator.
I'm gonna run this.
Yeah. So it took 10 years, right? Because I wasn't politically correct, right? And most of the people that were promoted were people who were coming up through the custody ranks, right? Because it was a prison, so you had to be the people who, you know, knew how to control the inmates, right? So as a psychologist, I wasn't a popular person to be promoted to that position, but I eventually succeeded, and I was in charge of the prison. And then I went back and did it again. This time, nobody could tell me to stop, right? So, but even after that, when I went back and did it again, I knew I would end up paying a price because I was bucking the system. I was doing what you're not supposed to do, right? And to make it even worse, I was doing it as the administrator of the prison, going in and running programming with the inmates.
You were seeing good results from
Oh yeah.
this program?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons I was doing it, is because I knew that this could make a huge difference for people to wake up and see reality, see what was true, especially for people in prison, right? And so, oh yeah, the idea that it worked was no question at all. But I knew I was going to have to pay, and I did have to pay. I was attacked, and it's a long story, but you know, I had to pay the piper for doing that, right? But the thing about it for me was that it didn't matter anymore. You know, it didn't matter anymore. You don't. It's like there's something going on that is producing what you're doing that you have no choice about. You know, because it's kind of it's just kind of a natural expression of who you are, is to you know, to be of service whenever you can, to make a difference whenever you can. That becomes what life becomes about. You know, service. You discover, for example, one of the things you discover is that giving, all along you thought that taking was the thing to do, right? And you couldn't understand why all the taking you were doing wasn't satisfying, right? You couldn't understand why a relationship you were in wasn't working when you were in that relationship to take, right? And afterward, it was obvious that it's the opposite. To get what you really want, it happens when you give, not when you take. So your life becomes about seeing where you can give, you know, seeing where you can give. Life becomes about not going in the kitchen and seeing dishes in the sink and getting pissed off because somebody left them there. Life becomes about going in the kitchen and seeing dishes in the sink and washing the dishes. Life becomes a lot simpler. You stop trying to find what's wrong and who did it to punish them, and you start looking to see what can I do that will be useful, like that. It's a different view. It's a completely different view. And that view produces what you were always after anyway. You know, when you start to give, you start experiencing what you really wanted. When you start to love, you start to experience love. And then you realize you had it backwards. You thought to get love was the trick. No, it's to give love is the trick. And in the giving of it, you actually experience it. In the giving, the nature of love is in the expression of it, you experience it. Not in trying to get it, right? Because what you discover through these teachings and practices is that you are that. How can you get that when you are that? If you express that, you experience what you are. If you express love, you experience love because you are love. That's the math. If you express love, you experience love because you are love. Right? So you see these things, right? And the seeing of these things becomes possible when what was in the way is out of the way. And what was in the way was that you thought you knew what you didn't know, and you thought who you were was what you were when it wasn't. And that was in the way. When that's out of the way, now you can see. You can see that you're not the center of the world. You can see that you're not the center of the universe. You can see that you are an instrument that's in service of what's happening, not a little fearful clod of wants and needs that's pissed off because the world doesn't give you what you want. You know, that's the default state for most of humanity when you identify with being something you're not, when you identify with being a physical body and you identify with being the psychological idea that your life becomes very small, becomes very little. Your life becomes about this little body and this little individual, limited person, right, that's insatiable, right, that can't help themselves behaving the way they do, and because of that, they're their own enemy, right? Can't help yourself. That's why I said the condition that human beings are in on a scale of, you know, like being effective and so forth, the condition that human beings are in is they're a detriment. Human beings are a detriment. They can't even act in their own best interest. That's the thing that you see clearly when you wake up and you see the truth and you see who you really are, is that until that happens, you can't act in your own best interest because you're acting in the best interest of a ghost. You're acting in the best interest of something that doesn't exist. And you're trying to get that to work, right? And so you can act in your own best interest. But when you see the truth, when you recognize reality, when you're free from those limitations, then you can start to act in your own best interest. And the irony is that your best interest is the best interest of other people. That's the irony. It turns out that your best interest is the best interest of other people. And so when you begin to serve other people, you discover your needs are getting met. You begin to serve other people, you begin to experience the satisfaction of being served. When you begin to serve other people, you begin to experience the satisfaction of being served, because it serves you to serve. You know, that starts to become apparent, right? So you stop putting your energy where it doesn't work and you start putting your energy where it does work. And things start to become smoother. Of course, given the fact that we live in a world that is yet to be transformed, or a world in which humanity is still living primarily in a state of ignorance, you've got that if you wake up, you have a big job ahead of you. If you wake up, your job is to save the world. But you see, one of the things you come to realize is the world doesn't need to be saved. You come to realize the world doesn't need to be saved. The world is perfect. All we have to do is work together to stop thinking of it to stop thinking of it in a way that has the way it is seem wrong. To stop thinking, all we have to do is stop thinking of it in a way to have the way it is seem wrong. That's transformation. That's why they say the kingdom of heaven on earth. Because the reality is that nothing has to change in order for everything to be perfect, because it already is. And if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to look to see if you can see clearly and understand for yourself, how could it be that the world as it occurs to me, right, is perfect? How could it be that the world is in which there's war, in which there is corruption, in which there's greed, in which there's murder, in which there's deceit, in the world in which all that's happening all the time is perfect? That's the kind of question you need to address if you're going to travel the spiritual path, because you've got to get to a place where you can see things in a way where you can see that it's the way you're thinking about it and the way you're looking at it that's causing it to be the way it is. And the way you think about it and the way you're looking at it then manifests itself in the way you behave, and the way you behave contributes to the way it is. Do you see that? The way you see it and the way you are thinking about it and the way you feel about it, which is not the way it is. The way you're thinking about it, the way you feel about it, which is not the way it is where you're behaving from. And when you behave from there, you're contributing to the situation that we currently have. And that's perfect because that's what it's going to take for you to wake up. Well, that's what I just said to you is a good question for you to have. Answering that question is a waste of time. Because for me to answer that question, I could give you all these highfalutin conceptual, but that's not going to solve anything for you. That's not going to change your view. It's not going to change.
But in your view, do you view that as happening in a perfect world?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm definitely not there.
Well, it doesn't mean that I think it's nice, that I think that I like it, right? But at the same time, the idea that it's perfect is something that can't necessarily be seen from the view that you're looking from.
I see. Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, and so there may be a view that you're not looking from, and that view may be a view that's way back, in terms of what's going on. And if you could see from that view, you would say, oh, this is perfect. This has got to happen, so that'll happen, and that's got to happen, so this will happen, and that's got to happen. You see what I'm saying? But you can't see that close up. Close up is just, oh no, this is terrible. Well, the key to it is for you to be interested in your own salvation, to be interested in getting yourself out of the condition of suffering. So it's interesting because that's a selfish motive, right? But the selfish motive can take you to selflessness. We start out, it's just like one of the things I like about, I keep bringing this guy up, and one of the things I like about Ramesh Balsekar is that he understands that the people who are on a spiritual quest are egotistically approaching that. You understand? The people who are on a spiritual quest are approaching that as an ego who's doing it to get something, right? So if you understand that, you have to deal with that. You have to play with that. You have to understand. You have to talk the ego into suicide.
But it seems like from your point of view, after your transition, it seems like you're looking at life as your purpose being to make the world a better place, to make it better than when you got here, that you're benefiting other people around you, that you're giving instead of taking, and you're leaving this place a little bit better off. That seems to be your intent.
It's not.
It's not?
No. No, it's not to make the world a better place. It's to have people wake up and see that the world is okay. It's not change.
It's already a better place.
That's right. That the reality of it is heaven on earth. That's what the teachings tell us, isn't it? Yeah, the reality of it is heaven on earth. So it's not about a better place. It's a complete transformation. It's about seeing things in a completely different way than you were seeing things. That it's already okay. It's already resolved. Well, it means that you accept that you are part of the way things are. That's a little different. You are part of the way things are. So you're not separate from the way things are. You and the way things are the same thing. Right? So there's no see, that's the if you and the way things are the same thing, there's no place for you to be separate from it to have a problem. Isn't it true? If you are the weather, how can you judge the weather? You see? So that's the idea of non-duality, right? Of realizing that this is what this is that's happening is not something that there's any judgment about when you're being it. You have to separate yourself from it to judge it, don't you? Yeah, but if you're being it, there's nothing to judge. You are what's happening. And when you are what's happening, there is a different, things occur differently than they do when you think you're separate from things happening. That's the whole gist of it, right? That's the whole gist of it, right? Because the falling from grace of human beings is the separation that we think is real. You know, that I'm separate from you, that we're separate from the world and all that. And that's the illusion that dissolves. And when that dissolves, you see everything's fine. Everything's fine.